In this video, I would like to talk about one of the biggest ethnicities in Europe, Slavs. Where did they come from? Where did they form their first proto-states? Before answering these questions, I would like to mention that this video mainly focuses on Eastern Slavs, which dominated the territories of modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Let's start with the name Slav. First, the word Slav in all language means word. So, Slav is a person who speaks the same language. Second version says it comes from the word language, and third hypothesis suggests that Slav comes from the name of river Dnieper, which in old times was called Slavutich. In present day, all Slavic groups kept the word Slav, and some of them still call themselves Slavs, like Slovenians and Slovakians. Slav ancestors are Proto-Indo-Europeans who lived in the Pontic-Caspian steppe across Eurasia. Roman historian Tacitus mentioned Slavs already in the 1st century. He wrote about some tribes, Veneti, who lived across Danube. They were not Germans nor nomads. They walked and used shields. But the regular mentions about Slavs started to appear only in the 5th-6th centuries. Byzantines wrote that the Slavs lived in small huts and frequently changed their place of living. In fight, they did not use horses and have only shields and spears. They did not wear chainmail. Slavs' way of life was primitive and was very similar to Sonnus. At that time, in Eastern Europe, Avars' Khaganate was very powerful. Avars recruited Slavs and conducted raids on Byzantine territories. As Avars were nomads, after each raid they went back to the station, but Slavs started to settle in Balkans. By the 6th century, Slavs colonized Alps. This event instigated the development of Slovenians and Croats as separate Slavic ethnicities. In the 7th century, Avars' Khaganate became weak, and Slavs got more independency. But the new nomadic tribe came from the east. They were Bulgars, one of the Turkic tribes. In Eastern Europe, they assimilated with Slavs and created a new ethnicity. Bulgars were predominantly Slavic, as Slavs were greater in numbers. They created one of the first Slavic states, Kingdom of Bulgaria, in 681. When Bulgarians became Christians through Byzantine, the last decided that the service had to be conducted in Bulgarian in order to make them Constantinople's ally. That's why when you go to the service in Russian Orthodox Church nowadays, you would hear a very strange language, which you fully cannot understand. It is Bulgarian language of the 9th century. Another powerful state, Great Moravia, situated in modern-day southeast Czech Republic and western Slovakia. In fact, in Moravia, the first Slavic alphabet, Glagolica, was created, which later was taken as a basis for Cyrillics. But let's go back to the east. Other Slavic tribes moved to the north and east and reached the modern-day Novgorod in the 8th century. Unfortunately, the history of Eastern Slavic tribes is not very rich in facts, because Byzantine contacted mostly with Balkan Slavs. Mentions about Eastern Slavs could be found only in Khazar Khaganate chronicles. There were 6 main tribes: Ilmen Slovenians, Vyatichi, Krivichi, Drigovichs, Severians, and Polans. Vyatichi lived in Upper Don and Oka basins, modern-day Moscow, Kaluga, Bryansk, Smolensk, and Voronezh. Their name came from the tribe's leader named Vyatka. They were engaged in cattle breeding, hunting, and agriculture. They were successful in blacksmith craft, as archaeologists found many relics like axes and sickles. Severians lived south of Vyatichi in modern-day Bryansk, Belgorod, Chernigov provinces. They lived on the trading route from the Varangians to the Greeks, where Scandinavians traded with Slavs. Also, Severians were engaged in trade with Khazars. Polans lived on the right bank of Dnieper River. They got their name from the place where they live. Pole means field. They were engaged in cattle breeding and agriculture. Drevlyani lived in modern-day Zhytomyr Oblast. They also got their name from the place of living, forest. They were mainly hunters and gathered berries. There is not much information about Drevlyani because they were not engaged in trade. But there is a story about them in semi-historical book Tale of Bygone Years. In the 9th century, Drevlyani tried to become independent from power of the first Rus dukes, but they were defeated by Duke Igor. Igor collected tribute from Drevlyans, and on the way home he turned back to the tribe and wanted to get the tribute for the second time. Of course, he got killed. His widow Olga had a brutal revenge and killed 5,000 people and burned their main town. In order to burn the town, she used birds, to the legs of which she attached lighted tow. Next tribe was Radimichi, who lived in the upper Dnieper basin, the modern-day Mogilov, Gomel, and Western Bryansk provinces. They got their name from the tribe's leader named Radimir. They were also hunters and gatherers. Krivichi were named after their leader Kriv. They lived in Smolensk, Polotsk, and Pskov, and were very fragmented. Their tribe union had 6 dialects. And the last big tribe was Ilmen Slovenians. They got their name from the place where they lived, Lake Ilmen. As they were the most northern tribe, Ilmen Slovenians were close to Scandinavia, with which they were engaged in trade. The proximity led to increasing Scandinavian influence on Ilmen Slovenians in the 9th–10th centuries. There is a legend, which in my opinion can be partially true. It is about creation of the first Rus ruling dynasty, Rurikovichi, and creation of Rus state. Ilmen Slovenians had constant power competition, and in 862, they decided to invite Scandinavian duke to rule them. That was Rurik, who became the first Rus duke. The next Duke Oleg had a successful military campaign in 882 and conquered Smolensk, Lubich, and Polyansk tribes. Some historians insist that the first Russian ruling elite was Scandinavian for the time being. The origins were Scandinavian, but over the years, the ruling elite fully assimilated with Slavs. Although the first dukes had Scandinavian names like Rurik, Oleg, Igor, but starting from the first duke, all leaders had Slavic names like Svetoslav or Yaroslav. In conclusion, I want to say that Ilmen Slovenians with Vyatichi and Krivichi were the ancestors of Russians. Krivichi, Drigovichi, Volyniani later became Belarusians, and Polans, Drevlyani, Tivertsi, Severians, Ulichi, and Volyniani became Ukrainians. Rus was always fragmented because there were thousands of kilometers between centers like Kiev and Novgorod, and because of numerous tribes. The formation of bigger Slavs unions like Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians only happened in the 14th century. That's it for today. Thank you for watching my videos. Please subscribe to my channel and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.